We are talking about this divine nature, and this is the series we're in. I think, John, we worked on both these series, Sunday morning and Sunday night together. I think this was John's thrust to look at the divine nature. And what an incredible passage that Andy read for us this morning about the divine nature. Isn't it incredible that we have a God who's blessed us tangibly, right? In ways that we can see, feel, touch, and know. It's a sad day. It's a sad occasion when Christianity has been neutered to the point of being intellectual. That faith has been destroyed to the point of being about simply a belief. How sad it is if the most powerful thing we as Christians have is warm and cozy words. And yet, we live that way sometimes, don't we? And this whole series is reminding us that the promise, John talked about the great and precious promises. And there's so many of those that I think that passage is referring to, but the specific one we're looking at is the promise that you can participate in the divine nature, God's image, God's will for your life. You see, we're all excited and expecting the salvation to come. But what about the salvation of today? What about not merely escaping the consequences of Mike's sins, but escaping the reality of the corruption of Mike's sins? You see, I think Peter would say it this way to us, and I think he very closely says this. Salvation is not standing on the day of judgment and saying, Mike, your anger was out of control and caused harm, but the blood of Christ covers you, and so you're not going to get what you deserve for that. I think Peter would have us know that there's salvation today. Like there's a different way of doing things. You can live a different way. I've granted you my Spirit. I've granted you the divine nature by which you can live your lives. We're in Philippians, the 4th chapter, and there Paul, after saying to the Philippians who were going through horrible things, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, as though it needed repeated, I say rejoice. He says, let your reasonableness be known to all men. Let your gentleness be known to all men. Let your moderation be known to all men. Paul was saying, Christians are to be different. Christians are to be different. Now, we face this struggle, right? Because Mike's still Mike. And a better Mike is still Mike. And sometimes we approach Christianity as though, well, I have to do better, right? And if that's the case, this Bible's not all that special because there's lots of books to help us with that. There's lots of self-help books say, here's what you do to be a better person. I hope my words this morning are words of encouragement because that's what's special about divine nature. Something granted to us, something given to us. Now, isn't it amazing? You go to the grocery store, and I know it's kind of got painful, right?
It's something we're all kind of forget. Not because Wendy's there. She's always so sweet and kind when you walk by the pharmacy. She makes the visit that much better. It's the end of the road when you're ready to walk out, when they exact their toll from you, right? That gets painful. But think about all the things in the grocery store and what they're going to do for us. You know, isn't it interesting that we say, I want to be better. I want to be healthier. And then I go to the grocery store and I start picking stuff off the shelf, right? What do I pick out? Are they things that help me? Are they things that make me healthier and better and stronger and all these wonderful things I'm seeking after? Or are they things that drag me down, make me worse? So think about that spiritually. We are in the grocery store of life. Now think about this. The divine nature, the ingredients for the divine nature have been paid for us. The others we have to pay for. Now what am I going to choose? All that fruit has already been paid for you. All you have to do is take it and use it and eat it and let it be a part of you. But if we go over to the candy aisle, sorry, Cam, candy's not healthy. It's not good for you. You have to pay for that. You have to get that yourself. It comes at a greatly inflated price. Where are you going to take? Well, it seems simple when you put it like that, doesn't it? But we get caught up in the moments, don't we? And sometimes we fail to stop, to be circumspect, to look circumspectly, as Paul would say to the Ephesians, to look around and to ask, what's this ingredient going to do to my dish, to my meal, to my life? What am I feeding? And what am I becoming? And so as we go throughout this, and I know last week I got through the introduction, so we're going to quickly review that introduction to set the context and get into it. But these are some of the things that we plan on looking at throughout the series if Mike ever gets past, the one assignment that he was given. One thing to do, Mike, and, well, we'll try. and so what are we shopping for? What are we going after? In this passage that Andy read for us, again, we're not going to deal with the whole passage tonight or this morning, but this first verse, his divine power has granted to us all things that pertain unto life and godliness through the knowledge of him who called us to his glory and excellence. And we noted last week that this is talking about more than written words, and thankful for that the power of God has been granted to his people to be something different, to live up to be part of his glory and excellence. And if you're Mike Smith, you're grateful for that, because I don't have to be Mike. I can be excellent and filled with glory. And Mike can't do that in and of itself. But furthermore, you see, this isn't just about reading, and please do not misunderstand me. I am not diminishing the sacred scriptures that we have. I am grateful, and they are a fundamental part of God's blessing to us. But it's not just an intellectual exercise. It's not about just having the right beliefs, because have you ever seen that meme? The world is changed by your example, not your opinion. The world is changed by God's example, not by Mike's opinion. Right? And Christianity is not about my opinion. It's not even about my beliefs. It's about my experience and my example. And so we see that we've been called to this. It's not by accident that you are here. It's not by accident that you exist, that you were created, but rather you have been called for a specific purpose. To live God's image.
And so as Christians, we can be emboldened, we can be encouraged, and we can be prodded forward to live that kind of life, because that is why we exist, by which he has granted to us his precious and great promises, that through them you may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped. Notice the past tense. Escaped from the corruption that is in this world because of sinful desire. And you see, as I prayed, and we all long for the ultimate escape totally from the corruption that is going to take place, we already have been delivered from it because of what God has done for us. So it's been granted to us by divine power to partake of that divine nature. Can you imagine this? And I know I said the fruit was already paid for, but can you imagine, and we do this, especially here in North America, right? I can't remember the number that is tagged in billions of wasted food, that we are so spoiled, overly blessed in our part of the world, that we don't even think about. Can you imagine paying a dear price, the very blood of the Son of God, for these ingredients, and letting them sit on our counter and rot? My heart breaks knowing how much I've done that. How much I've done that. And, you know, as kids, I always said to Gordon Wells in Indiana, I said, Gordon, he's from the Cape, which is South Africa. And I said, Gordon, it's so awesome to meet you. I grew up my whole life hearing about you. And he said, you have? I said, yeah, I've always heard about starving children in Africa. and he laughs. But can you imagine, I'm allowing the fruit to live in as we start to think about that analogy, we all heard growing up, eat that food, there's starving children in Africa. Well, me getting a stomach ache doesn't really fix their problem, does it? But come back to my analogy for a moment. You see, there are starving people in our world, not in Africa. Yes, in Africa, but right here in our broken communities, right here in our churches. And I'm allowing God's divine nature to sit idle and rot. That becomes hurtful. And I'm not talking about you, although I suspect you can see that in your mirror. It's hurtful for me to realize the consequences of allowing these things to go unutilized. And the blessing that we have is to escape that corruption. Throughout my life, there's been so much bad said about me. About 80% of it's true, right? But what if we expanded that 20%? Right? People are going to talk. People are going to think ill of you regardless. What if it was unfounded? Right? What if I was exhibiting the divine nature of God? What if I could escape that corruption even more? Because I can. If I submit, if I choose the ingredients that have been blessed to me. Faith is the starting point. We talked about the power of faith last week. As we start into the text we really are going to delve into today. Verse 5 says, for this very reason, make every effort to supplement your faith with virtue, and virtue with knowledge. And Paul doesn't feel the need to talk too much about faith here in this passage because he has in so many letters. Amen? Does Paul write about faith? Yeah, is it in every sentence of the book of Romans? Almost. Right? Is it the foundation of everything he talks about? It's the starting point. And so he's assuming the people that are reading his letters, he's assuming that the people here in these pews, he's assuming that those of you streaming with us today have a starting point of faith. And it's so powerful. We used this example of Crazy Horse last week. Faith can remove mountains. Jesus said, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can remove mountains. It doesn't even have to be godly faith to be powerful. Believe that you can, or believe that you can't. You are right. Faith is the most powerful human element in this world. Now, divine that with the divine power. God says, have godly faith. Imagine what can happen. But it's one thing to have faith in God. Do we believe in God's plan? Or maybe it sounds a little bit like this. Yeah, I have faith in God, I just don't trust him. You ever been there? Probably. I have. Right? I have faith in God, but oh man, Lord, we talked about this in our class. There are some things that I don't like. We talked about one of those this morning, right? I don't like that. I know the Bible says I don't like it. You see, in those situations, do I step into his will and trust him? I have faith in God. I just know that it's better if I do it my way. Or is Satan so much sneakier that that's more self-awareness, that's more honesty with ourselves than sometimes we muster? Maybe if it was framed this way in our mind, maybe if Satan was this up front, we'd say, man, you're crazy. I'm going with him. I'm going with God, right? I'm going his way. So, faith is not only instrumental, fundamental, powerful, but here's the very premise of this passage. It's easy to miss because there's so many elements we're going to look at, so many fruit to pick from, to add to this dish that we're making. That the very premise is Paul is saying, minister to your faith, supplement your faith. Okay, you have faith, that's good. Now start nourishing it. Start taking care of it. Start helping it mature so you can be a partaker of the divine nature. You with me this morning? For this reason, make every effort to supplement your faith, to minister to your faith. The first thing that we take in this passage and we minister to our faith with is virtue. And we talked about this last week, that we can't want the same things that the world wants. One motivational speaker says we can have anything in life that we want as long as we don't have 100 competing desires at the same time. Right? What's the competing desires? What do I want in life? Am I willing to escape the corruption? Is that my primary desire? Or as 1 Timothy 6, 9 and 10 talks about the desire of wealth and how we self-impel ourselves when we become consumed with greed, when we have a desire of the world to accumulate wealth. And this is one example that Paul's writing to Timothy, and I use it for this idea. Well, Lord, I want more honesty in the world. I can make a lot of money. I can protect my assets if I. He said, we've got to want things that are different than what the world wants. we've got to want that divine nature and put aside all the other temptations. And I believe we ended last week. Can you believe that? I took like 35 minutes to do what I've done like 6 or 7 minutes here this morning. You'll have to step out of the boat. Peter said it this way: we're going to be a peculiar people, a precious people, some translation says. You know, something that's peculiar or precious, it stands out, right? Are we willing to stand out? Where do we go to get our desires? Is it virtue? You see, virtue is excellencies of praise, something that stands above everything else. It's a divine nature. Are we willing to pursue it? I know. Or do I? So that faith is going to be ministered to with virtue. And this translation, more literal translation, reads like this: and in the exercise of your virtue, knowledge. As you are exercising, isn't it interesting? What you exercise, what happens to it? Gets stronger. I was waiting for someone to say it gets tired. Which is a part of becoming stronger, right? What you exercise becomes stronger. What you exercise becomes habitual. What you exercise happens without conscious effort. There's some things come very natural to Mike. There's some things that don't. In our exercise of virtue, knowledge is displayed. That's the literal translation. Knowledge is displayed. What kind of knowledge? Oh man, we've got access to Facebook, so we can get all the good knowledge now, right? I mean, isn't it interesting? And you know, it was interesting to hear Amanda reading primary sources at the beginning of COVID. Isn't it interesting that in 2020, millions, hundreds of millions of people became experts in infectious disease? And you got some talking heads saying incredibly stupid things on TV and millions of people, and they're saying, we looked at sources no one else looks at. And then you have millions of people saying, I've looked at sources no one else has looked at. And here's the real truth. Now they listened to a talking head that said they looked at sources no one else looked at. It was interesting to read primary sources, right? Or not read it. I let Amanda do that, but she was digging through it, right? What kind of knowledge? Here's why I'm illustrating, if you heard me clearly. Not everything that claims to be knowledge is knowledge. If you recall last week, we talked about knowledge as being experimental, something we experience, something tangible. There's all kinds of things that claim to be knowledge. Romans chapter 2 says, be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Let me paraphrase that. Don't buy into all the knowledge of the world. Right? There were things that took place. I'm 45 years ago, so let's go back 30 years ago that were commonplace, that almost everyone agrees now are unacceptable. Right? I watched a series on Netflix recently about things that took place on TV in the 90s. That not only, we're not talking about cancel culture, we're like, why would you do that? Right? Not the knowledge of this world, but rather the knowledge of God. The last part of that verse, Romans 12:2, says, so you may prove, or you may know, you may express, you may share, you may exhibit God's will. God's will. That's true knowledge. That's the kind of knowledge that's talking about. And so, who are our counselors? Right? Who understands these issues? Is it the Word of God? Is it His nature? Or where is it that we find this knowledge? If it's part of virtue, it's the knowledge of God. Right? And so, in a short period of time, I know that you have these things played out in front of you, and there seems to be a significant list there. But think of them, each one, as I said, is that literal, and I forgot there's a word up there some of you have caught on to. All right. The rest of you are catching it. Here. So bear in mind, it was intentional this time, Pam. Bear in mind that each one of these, the literal reading, and in your virtue, knowledge. So in your knowledge, self-control is exhibited. Ha! Now that's foreign to life, right? You mean that you can have knowledge and self-control is part of that? You mean I don't have to expel out everything that I know? You're reminding me of that right now, right? Yeah, self-control. The knowledge of God, God's will brings about self-control. I got this quote from a very old commentary. In fact, the commentator believed that people lived in the sun and moon. But it doesn't mean everything he said was bad. He used this terminology. Incontinence weakens the mind. Now, I said, no, I have to use that. Think about that. We use incontinence very specifically, don't we? A weakened muscle, right? A weakened process. The lack of self-control, incontinence, weakens the mind, brings about more incontinence. And if you know the specific use of that, which I think most of you do, I think it's very relevant for self-control about what comes out when we don't have, as John suggested last week, godly control. Right? We're free-flowing, unintentional. Steadfastness, patient endurance through struggles. You know, here's something that's incredible. I know I just made you go black. Sorry. About steadfastness and divine nature. Don't we tend to think about that as like, oh, all the troubles are going to be gone? No, right here, in our self-control, be steadfast. It means keep going through the troubles, through the struggles, through the persecution. That's godliness. You know, Jesus could have wiped out all the struggles, couldn't he? He could have struck Pilate dead. He could have done all kinds of things, bring down legions of angels to wipe out the struggles. Instead, he showed steadfastness. That's the divine nature. Am I putting that in my fruit salad? Godliness. You see that steadfastness in context. It's explained, it's shown, it's manifested in my steadfastness. It's not alone. So that steadfastness isn't just being stoic. You ever, girls, you won't understand this. Cam is getting at this age where this kind of thing will start happening. You know, pinch me and see how long I can endure. Put your hand over the flame. Who can hold it there the longest, right? Was that ever you, Chris? No? Okay, good. Not just being stoic. You see, we're not steadfast in our trials because we're tough. We're steadfast because the steadfastness, the patient flows from God. I trust in God. God has this. God can see me through this. God loves me. Brotherly affection or kindness is to be God sanctioned. You see, the brotherly affection comes from godliness, right? I love you like a brother. I mean, like a good brother, theoretically speaking, Stephanie, right? I have a natural affection for you because of my godliness. I'm from God. And you're from God. It's a whole different way of looking at one another, and it changes the dish we put out. Love, acts of goodwill based on genuine affection. Yeah, I don't just appreciate you as a fellow child of God. And I mean that in a sense God created. I want the best for you, and I will act to bring the best for you. Will that change our relationships? Will that change the way we go throughout our life and what we have in our life? Paul would have us say, if. For if. Did you get that? They don't have to be there. They were paid for. They were made available. They are presented on our plate. If these qualities are yours and are increasing, have you got there yet? You know I'm not near. You see, they can't just be present. The walk isn't done. The fight's not over. The effort can't be given up. If these are yours and are increasing, they keep you from being ineffective or unfruitful. I want to confess to you, brothers and sisters, my life is not as effective or fruitful as it should be. If you can relate to me on that point, if you can lament the effectiveness of your Christianity, the fruitfulness of your walk with Christ, then can we be joined in prayer and effort to exhibit this divine nature in our lives? Wouldn't it be awful? Wouldn't it be terrible to be given the greatest blessings ever imagined to mankind and to let them go to waste? Wow. This message this morning, it's not for anyone out there. It's not for the person sitting next to you. It's for two people. It's for me. It's for you. I think Peter could have said that. It's for me, Peter. It's for you, reading this letter. We've been given tremendous blessings that can make us effective and fruitful in our walks of life. May we dedicate ourselves to submitting to the will of God. This morning, if we can help you to do simply that, please make your need known as together we stand and sing.